show.
Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports. A lot of things we talk with him about college football and more. We'll do that in a second. Craig Smoke, David Smoke, 365 Sports. Dan, thank you very much for your time as always. When you heard the news about Willie Mays and passing away at 93, what recollections, what came to your mind?
Yeah, just the general, it just seemed the way the man carried himself through his whole career and after his career. I don't remember him as a player. I mean, obviously I know the stories and the records and the numbers and, the argument he's the greatest baseball player of all time. He certainly got to be in that conversation, I would guess. But I don't know that I ever heard anything but a kind of a class bit about Willie Mays and the way he carried himself and the way he promoted himself in the game and the Giants and everything else. So heck of a life lived there. 93. Pretty amazing guy.
So what were your thoughts last week when there was the story one after another about the Big 12 and naming rights and even the possibility of discussions with a private equity firm?
Yeah, I mean, look, they need to do whatever they probably can do. They seem that, they need money. They believe they need money. They need to try to close a revenue gap. I don't know how, you can never really close it. It's just a matter of demographics. And, much of the Big 12 is not located in states with big cities the way you would have in the Midwest or even the South at this point. And, there's only so much you can do. So you got to be creative. Renaming the conference, look, I'm a traditionalist. I prefer none of this, but I totally get it. You got to do it. So it's the All-State 12 or whatever. I mean, they're going to have 16 teams and call themselves the Big 12 anyway. The Big 10 has 18 teams. The Atlantic Coast Conference has 2 teams in the San Francisco Bay Area and 1 in Dallas. What are these things anymore? So if this is what it is, this is what it is. We've certainly seen it in college sports. We've seen it in the bowl industry, whatever name you can come up with, the Pop-Tart Bowl, whatever. Celtics win the title last night, one of the great franchises in all of pro sports. They have a Vistaprint patch on their jersey, right? Advertising. You look at the English Premier League and the sponsor gets the main part of the jersey and the crest of the team, whether it's Liverpool or Manchester United or any of these big, famous teams, is relegated to, your chest, like the left part of your chest there. And so the NASCARification of college football is inevitable because they've NASCARificated everything else in sports pretty much.
And that's your Mark's background, right, Dan? I mean, that's part of why they brought him in. I know there's a lot of people that he seems to rub the wrong way, I guess, that are more traditionalist, or maybe they want the Big 12 to wither up and die so they can have their Super League or whatever. But, based on what you brought him in for, I think he's doing exactly what you expected. You don't necessarily go through with the private equity. You don't necessarily change the name of the conference, but it is his job to present you. Not that everything he comes up with is going to be a great idea. I want to say that first and foremost, but I mean, this is what you hired him for, basically, not to be your traditional commissioner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I think it's a good idea. I mean, it's a way to make some money. And look, the Pac-12 used to be the Pac-8, then they became the Pac-10, then they became the Pac-12. They were probably the most consistent with being accurate, and now they don't exist. So would they rather be the Google 12 or something like that, or the Apple 12
right, and
exist? You got to do what you got to do. It's just, again, I remember when they put the swoosh on the Penn State uniforms, and those were sort of the most basic uniforms you could possibly have under Joe Paterno. It was either white or it was blue. That was it. And they put that swoosh on there, and it was a big thing. And it's sort of like from there on, people are going to have to make their decision on what they want to do. And so Yeah, is it a little, again, it's going to take some time to get used to, sure. But if it helps your team compete, if it helps save some sports, if it helps whatever, I think you live with whatever you're going to call this thing, the All-State 12. Not every, there'll be degrees to this, just like there are in the bowl games. You're not going to get a Waffle House logo on the side of the Notre Dame helmet, right? But
Right.
It's the Rose Bowl presented by Prudential, and then there's the Duke's Mayo Bowl where we dump a jug of mayonnaise on the winner, right?
Yeah.
So, as a traditionalist, I don't love it. As a fan of comedy and college football, this is going to be great. I mean, I got a podcast. I need content, and some of the whatever they come up with in the Sun Belt and the and Conference USA and the MAC. I mean, you think this is some of those college basketball leagues that you only hear about once a year? I mean, this is going to be fairly hysterical, some of the sponsorships.
Oh, I love the time. Mid-June was perfect to drop like some, hey, we're going to change the name of the conference and we're going to go private equity maybe. And I was like, thank God, thank you for this news. That's fantastic. But I did wonder, as much as you're trying to close the gap, and it does rub traditionalists and maybe a program like a Michigan or a Texas the wrong way, like we would never do that. If, in fact, they were to go the private equity route, and of course there's so many details, it's not just a black and white thing, but if they were, into theory, close the gap, do you think the tune would change and you'd see the SEC go, we're the SEC brought to you by Coca-Cola, or we have the Coca-Cola patch on the Georgia shoulder, or do you think there would be enough blowback because they're situated so where they are that that's a line you don't cross?
Again, I mentioned Liverpool, Manchester United,
Right,
and the Boston Celtics. I mean, right? I don't think anybody's there's going to be degrees to it, like I said.
Yeah.
Notre Dame football presented by Prudential or something like that, you understand. You could understand why, like, the University of Akron will have a tire logo on its helmet, okay? They're two different things. And so Michigan and Texas, they can look down at it now, but it's, they all have the official this of Wolverine football and the official this of Texas sports, and everybody needs money. Everyone's going to want money. How much you want to, how clunky you want to get with it is what it is. But I think that you'll just have degrees of this, and sometimes it'll be that's just it. This is where we're at again. This is where we're at with sports, and I think my number one concern for college football, and especially watching things like the Big East football, which was a lot of fun, and the teams that used to be in the Big East football really aren't, having as much fun as they used to when they just played each other, and seeing the Pac-12 fall apart after 108 years. Like, I want these conferences to go. I don't want to see a super league. I don't mind if at the end it's Texas and Michigan and Ohio State and Georgia and all those places. But I want Baylor to be there, TCU, and I want UTEP to have a team, and I want all these things. So if this is what it takes, then that's fine. I don't want a super league. And look, I mean, how quickly is the Oregon logo in the middle of the field just going to be a swoosh?
No.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not long, right? And what if it's Mercedes-Benz that puts their logo in the middle of, like, Bryant Denny or Ohio Stadium or something like that? Well, maybe that's not so bad, but it's all going to be a matter of what each school is comfortable with. But money talks. We've seen that in every single way in college athletics.
Well, and even those who don't really need, they're always in need of more money, but the ones that may not need to do it now, they're not changing conferences or part of those SEC and Big Ten because they just like the scenery. They did that because of money. So they've been doing and making decisions because of that too, in a different way. And it's forced others to find a way to play catch up. You wrote an article about Ryan Day and Ohio State, quotes from Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel and much more. Does he have more burden on him entering the season than maybe anyone else in college football? I
think so. I really do. I think the only other coach with as much, or not as much, but as a different pressure is Dabo Swinney to see if he can keep the Clemson program back to elite. But certainly there's a lot of pressure everywhere. But Ohio State, 3 straight losses to Michigan. This is going to be Ryan Day's 6th season. They haven't won a national championship. And that's fine. That shouldn't necessarily be the standard, but the losses to Michigan are a big deal. But this is a team that returned, about nine guys, maybe more, that could have gone to the NFL, decided to stay. They're absolutely loaded. They loaded up on the recruiting, on the transfer portal. They have this a very good class coming in, as they always do at Ohio State. The program's rolling. So, but they don't have the titles. They don't have the championship game appearances. They have one. They lost pretty big to Alabama. You have Urban Meyer coming out. I mean, fascinating. Rat poison. Who knows what Urban Meyer's doing? But this is the greatest, most talented roster I've ever seen. The most talented in the last 10 years, maybe ever. Like ever? Like the 2001 Miami Hurricanes? Like what? But that's the comments that are being made, and that just puts more on it, because the fans, understandably, if you say I have the best roster in the history of college football or something close to it, you expect to win. And you go and say, oh, what about the 2001 Miami Hurricanes? They won it. Or 2004 USC or 2005 Texas or whatever super team you want to come up with. But it takes more than just, you need health, you need a little luck, you need chemistry. I mean, there's a lot more than just pure talent, but there is nobody in Columbus, including Jim Tressel, pretty much said the same thing, and Urban Meyer went over the top, doing anything to curb expectations or pretend that this isn't a all or nothing situation. And I think the hard part is we don't really know how you win a 12-team playoff. And like, it's not just having the most dominant team all year. You're now going to have to win 3 playoff games at least, maybe 4. In the Big Ten, you have all these other teams in it now. You have to play Oregon as well as Penn State and Michigan this year for Ohio State. In the Big Ten championship game, you're not going to get Iowa or one of these teams you could win easy. Like, that's going to be a real game. You have to keep your players motivated all the way to January 20th. Pretty close to the combine, when a lot of kids on that team are thinking NFL also. How do you do all these things? We've seen, just because you go 15-1 or 14-2 in the NFL, you don't win the Super Bowl. It's who's hot at that moment. So I think it's a whole different thing. And yeah, Ohio State's got a lot of great players. Maybe they have the best roster in football this year, but Georgia, Texas, Oregon, and a few others aren't that far behind if they aren't equal or better. And they're going to have to bring in, they have a new quarterback in Will Howard. I mean, there's just enormous pressure on Ohio State to win them all at a time when it's really hard to win them all.
So, Dan, Oklahoma and Texas is clearly going to take some attention away and some shine away, some spotlight away from the Big 12. The conference now is more new schools than it is schools from 10 years ago, which is why, a name change doesn't seem as big of a deal. They couldn't win a 14 playoff even with the Texas and Oklahoma, even though TCU got the closest to that. And being $40, $50, $60 million behind 2 conferences now, to think that they're going to be able to win 3 more playoff games potentially, it's just kind of hard to fathom that. But when you think about the Big 12, this mutated version that it's become, what do you make of it, where it just kind of sits, and what intrigues you, if anything, about the Big 12 as it enters this next stage?
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It doesn't have those North Stars to, those kind of bedrock programs, but anybody can rise up and do this, potentially year by year. And I just think you have a whole bunch of really good football programs, and if you catch magic, it can be great. And I do understand the revenue gap, and I understand the complaints of coaches and ADs, and yeah, you're going to be able to really compete for players with Georgia and Ohio State. No, but did you ever? Were you that's not how TCU that's not how TCU beat Michigan. It wasn't by out recruiting Michigan. It was just putting together a better team. The one thing about college football, I keep saying when they talk about this super league, there's too many good players. There's too many kids in this country that are good at football to be limited to a certain number of schools. They cannot create an artificial barrier the way the NFL does, as long as all these teams get a chance. The NFL can say you're an NFL player, you're not, and you have to go to the Canadian Football League or the USFL or whatever, and you don't get to play against us. But in college football, you do. And there's enough kids that can sit there and say, hey, yeah, I guess, look, Indiana, Minnesota, some of these programs have had more money for a long, long time than a lot of – they never win. They don't have proximity to talent. They aren't places – kids are going to sit there and say, hey, man, I'm from Texas. I want to play in Texas. I want to play in the state of Texas. And maybe I don't ever want to be a Longhorn Aggie, but even if I did, well, they can't take everybody. There's too many good players they're going to circulate about. So I still think there's going to be great teams. I think that the opportunity to have one or even two teams every year in the playoff, do you change your – I mean, look, TCU didn't win the national championship, but I don't think anybody's complaining about how that season went down for them. It was magical. And their great memory is beating Michigan and having that, and getting there and all that. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you go to the Big 12 as a recruit or a transfer, and you're competing for a national championship, and you've got a better path at a lot of these Big 12 schools than the middle or the bottom of the SEC and the Big 10, where you're not going to climb over. You're a lot of schools in the Big 10. They have a ton of money, but are you ever going to climb over Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon, and maybe USC? Like, you're kind of stuck. You're not stuck in the Big 12. Anything is possible. You go to any of those schools, anyone can win it.
Dan, great segment. So glad we had you on. Thank you for your time today, man. Just really good stuff. Have a great summer.
You too. Always fun. Looking forward to the season.
Yes, sir. Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports, and he does that